Good evening. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sorry for the slight delay in our start time there. We had a few technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sarah Zenaida Gould, and I'm the Executive Director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. Today is the 93rd anniversary of the founding of the League of United Latin American Citizens, frequently known as Lulac, which is a storied civil rights organization with a rich history of advocating for Mexican Americans and other Latinos. To learn about how the public can explore Lulac's history online, as well as other educational resources, we're joined tonight by three guests. We have with us David Contreras, Lulac Texas historian and contributor to many online Lulac history projects, which we'll hear about tonight. We also have with us Dr. Carolina Villarroel, Brown Foundation Director of Research at the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage based at the University of Houston, and Dr. Gabriela Baeza Ventura, Associate Professor of Spanish at the University of Houston. She's also the executive editor of Arte Público Press and co-creator of the U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Center. As a couple of housekeeping items, first, a short disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed by our program guests are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. Secondly, tonight's MACRI talk is part of an ongoing series that we present year-round. So if this is your first time with us, we invite you to join us for future MACRI talks. And finally, if you have any questions for our guests, please put those in the comments and we'll try to answer them later in the presentation. Now, before we get started, given that it is Lulac's anniversary tonight, I wanted to just ask that if you are joining us from a Lulac chapter, let us know what Lulac chapter are you joining us from, and any Lulac stories, feel free to share those in the chat. So I'd like to invite David to tell us about his history with Lulac and how he got so involved in documenting Lulac history.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gould. Yes, I began my journey in Lulac in 1965 at the age of 14. And I'll tell you in my presentation exactly how I got involved in the history aspect and the research and the digitization in the presentation. But thank you so much for the opportunity to make this group aware of a partnership and a collaborative effort to grow, to digitize, archive, and share our rich Latino history, and to also share the incredible digital tools that are now available and accessible on the internet. Can you put up slide number 1?
Yep. 1 second. Here we go.
Yeah, this partnership includes the Houston Public Library, Houston Metropolitan Research Center. It includes Lulac at the national and state and local level. It includes Arte Público Press and MACRI. And the participants are, first and foremost, Micaela Selly, who is an archivist at the Houston Public Library for more than 8 years. And she grew their digital Latino collections from a handful, maybe 4 or 5, to more than 25 major collections. She was also instrumental in assisting with the development of a centralized digital Latino landing page on the Houston Public Library website. We also want to recognize Rick Parales, who is a deputy director of the Houston Public Library, and he authorized and dedicated resources to create the prodigious website page that I'll be discussing a little bit later. Secondly is Dr. Carolina Villarroel and her amazing team at Arte Público Press. Next is the support, the incredible support that we have received from the Lulac leadership team, President Domingo Garcia, CEO Cindy Benavides, and our communications director, David Cruz. And lastly is the support and guidance of my Lulac brother, Ray Valdez, my wife, Millie, and Lulac's preeminent historian, Dr. Cynthia Orozco, and MACRI's Executive Director, Dr. Sarah Gould. Although this effort began 8 years ago, most of the progress has been made in the last 2 years during the pandemic. And the most significant transformational progress has been made in the last 12 months. Can you put up slide 2, please? In April of last year, a landing page for Latino history was created on the Houston Public Library website. This website page it aggregates and centralizes more than 30 Latino history resource links and is, to my knowledge, the first of its kind. The link to this website is houstonlibrary.org/Hispanic. As you can see, there's 30 links there to different sites. Slide 3, please. I want to cover the 8 sites that are the most significant. First, we have a site for the Houston Public Library Digital Collections, which has 25 collections, including an extensive collection of Lulac Newsletters. There's about 160 newsletters in this collection. Another link is the Handbook of Tejano History, which is associated with the Texas State Historical Association Handbook. And this has about 1,200 entries or articles. If you go to this site, you just click on the search button, you type in Lulac, it'll take you to more than 100 different articles. It's an incredible tool. It's a wonderful tool. Another awesome site is one called Latinopia Com. And this is a place to discover and discuss Latino arts, and history, and music, and literature, cooking, and cinema. This site is owned by a fellow by the name of Jesus Trevino, who's a playwright. I think he's a director. And I think he actually did a documentary of the 1972 La Raza Convention. Another site which will be discussed today is the Historical Timeline. This is an interactive digital timeline of Lulac's significant milestones. The milestone can be credited, that work, to Dr. Cynthia Orozco. Another link is to Latino Americans PBS series. It's a 6-hour PBS documentary of Latino American history. From this landing page, you can also go to the Arte Público website, which is the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage Archives. This program to locate, preserve, and disseminate Hispanic culture of the United States in its written form since the colonial times until the 1980s. And there is another link to a University of Texas site called Voces Oral History Center. This is a collection of hundreds of interviews of Latino veterans of World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam War. And the next slide, please. And the last link is a website that I've been working on for about 8 years. And this is called mas-latino.com. And this is a accumulation of 18 Latino websites, of which 6 are dedicated to Lulac. Through this website, there are links to collections archived at major universities such as USC, UCLA, and the University of Arizona. I encourage you to visit these sites, the one at the Houston Public Library, and you can get to the other 8 that I mentioned, including mas-latino.com, and browse through the collections and share these links with your associates, your friends, your family, and especially our youth. Next, I want to summarize a preliminary plan. It's an improvement plan to make these archives better. Slide number 5, please. We want to identify new and existing collections. There are still many collections that reside in some sites Some are rather esoteric, but we want to find them and we want to bring them into this landing place. We want to develop additional websites to expand on our Latino demographic diversity, our literature, our culture, our art, our food, our music, and theater. We want to improve the navigation and search tools. We want to improve and increase the website technology capabilities, and especially the website optics. We want to improve the content, the context, the metadata, and the curating of the collections. And then we want to promote the website landing page to make the public aware of its existence. Now I want to share 2 success stories. Next slide, please. My involvement with this effort is as a volunteer. I'm not a historian, I'm not an educator. My background is 45 years in bank operations and technology as an executive, as an administrator, and a consultant. 8 years ago, I was involved in the Lulac committee for an event to commemorate the 50th anniversary of John Kennedy's visit with Lulac in Houston, Texas, the day before he was assassinated. This was the first time in history that a sitting US president had addressed a Latino group. My job was to find photos and news clippings, videos, historical documents about the 1963 visit and to create a website. I did this work to honor my uncle, Ernest Aguia, who was 93 years old at the time, a decorated World War II veteran, and a 70-year member of Lulac Council 60. He had once told me that he had a collection at the library, so I began to do research to examine his collection, and I found many, many others. What I learned was that there were more than 100 collections. Most of this work can be credited to the time, efforts, and scholarly work of Tom Krennick. And most had been sitting in boxes for 20 or 30 years and had not yet been digitized. This led to a passion, a new passion, to devote about 8,000 hours to locate, digitize, and archive Latino history, most of it being Lulac, and by developing digitized collections and creating websites and YouTube videos. Now the success story. In October 2020, I received a call from my cousin, Becky Aguia, the daughter of my late Uncle Aguia, who I mentioned earlier, and she was quite emotional. She told me that her granddaughter had called her to tell her that her 6th grade teacher had a virtual class on the history of Lulac in Houston and had used one of my YouTube slideshow videos. In the video was a picture of her great-grandfather, Ernest Aguia. I called my friend Olivia Tallett, who's a gifted journalist at the Houston Chronicle, and she wrote a story about this which received front page coverage. My great niece, Addison Murray Curry, told her grandmother, and it's quoted in the story, "You're not going to believe this. They taught us about Lulac today. And guess what? I saw my papa." The second story is heartfelt also. And this happened about 2 years ago. While doing research for a Lulac brother, Isidro Garza, I came across a collection of Lulac Newsletters from the 1930s to the 1950s, which was sitting in a University of Texas repository. Further research had revealed that the collection was rather esoteric because nobody knew of its existence. I posted a copy of a 1931 newsletter on Facebook. Later that day, I received a text from a friend of my wife who advised me that she knew her grandfather had been involved in Lulac, but had no idea that he was the first publicity director of Lulac and was also the first Lulac newsletter editor. She had seen his name on the 1931 newsletter. Oh, can you do the next slide?
Yep, yes.
And she had seen his name on this photo that was posted on Facebook, and her name is Susie Condelopoulos, and she's now a member of our Lulac Council. But this is a sample of I think this is the second Lulac newsletter from 1931. And if you look at the page on the left, You can see the name of F. Valencia. Slide 8, please. And this is in conclusion, the ultimate goal of the project, this 8-year project, is to make the internet digital tools more accessible, to make the tools easy to navigate through, to provide effective search tools and features. And the ultimate goal is to make others aware of its existence and to get these links into the monitors, the notebooks, cell phones, and electronic devices of educators, students, and the general public. I feel this is our rich Latino history. This is our American history, and this history is very important. Viva Lulac, and thank you for the opportunity to share the progress that's been made to capture, digitize, archive, and showcase our rich Lulac history, and especially on the anniversary date of its founding. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I have to say, you know, David, you're such an inspiration to me, that in your free time, you've been doing this work and learning along the way. And I think for organizations like MACRI, knowing that we have people in the community like you, although I don't know that there's anyone else like you, but having somebody like you there doing this work, it not only demonstrates how valuable this knowledge is to the public, but that we've got friends in the community who are there to, you know, be partners with us. I think that your passion for making sure that this history doesn't get lost is contagious. So I just really appreciate it, David. I'm so glad you're with us tonight. And you are the Texas State historian for Lulac, and just I know that everybody from the Lulac chapters here in Texas benefits from the work that you're doing. So thank you. I do want to, one of the resources that you mentioned, of all of these resources that you've been digging into, is of course the storied Arte Público press, one of the older independent presses looking for stories from our communities. And so I'm wondering if we can learn a bit more about Arte Público and how Arte Público has been part of disseminating this kind of history. Oops, I think, Gabby, you're muted.
Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? No?
We can't hear you, Gabby, now.
Oh dear. Okay, let us go over maybe to Carolina, and we'll try to find out what's going on with Gabby's sound.
Mm-hmm.
No?
Did you have the first slide?
The first
I
slide.
can start.
Okay.
I can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to talk about our work and all our scholars' work. You know, and thank you, David, for the contagious passion that you show for history and for the history of Lulac. It's been inspirational. We've been working together for a few years already, and we've been able to develop incredible things together with along with other members of Lulac. So we're very grateful, and this is exactly what we want. We want historians working alongside the scholarly communities at the universities, creating bridges to bring this information, these materials back to the community, and to treat the community as creators of knowledge. I'm sorry. So can we go to the next slide, please? So, talking along the lines with the digital world, you see through our slides that after the work of Arte Público and the Recovery Project, we initiated a program center for U.S. Latino digital humanities. And what we are doing is trying to make these materials available through the community, to the community in general. That means community and scholarly community, students, etc., through this program. Can you go to the next one, please? And I wonder if Gabby can talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Is that better?
Gabby, you're back.
Perfect.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. So the goals of this center when we established it was to really create this physical space for the development, to provide support and training for digital humanities projects, right? And what we imagined is that this center would use the materials that are already housed at the recovery program. We want to create opportunities for digital publication, for visualizations, to work interdisciplinary, not only among the like intellectual, like university community that exists within like the institutions, but to demonstrate that our local communities are also carrying a lot of intellectual capital that should be shared. We need to bridge that gap between the institution and the community, right? So we're creating this communal virtual space, but also a physical space, and in the long run create a DH hub, which will allow us to have a copy, or like to create a virtual space where all of these projects that exist virtually can live, right? Or that we can at least have an archive of them. Can you go to the next slide, please? So just to give you a little bit of like the background on the shoulders that we stand on, this is the foundation of Arte Público Press, right? We began as a magazine in 1978, right? And that magazine evolved into a publishing house. And the publishing house also stem out of a social justice perspective, right? Where we're trying to create spaces for Latinos to write, to publish, to make their histories, their literature visible. Revista Chicano-Riqueña not only published like fictional or literary work, but it also published artists, and it also published scholarly academic publications. So it really set the foundation for the field of Latino studies. And these are just a few of the examples that we have on here. If you go to the next slide, you'll see a variety of civil rights series books that we have published over the years to document the activism that has been happening and is present in the Latino community, right? So one of the things that we also like to highlight is that for Arte Público, we see Latinos across a spectrum of a community who can be not native to the U.S. They can also be immigrants, but they can also be exiles, right? And at one moment or another, we can move between those categories, right? And like we can we can come in as exiles, but then we can become immigrants, and then eventually become natives of this nation. And so, as at any moment, we are still advocating for the rights that we have as a Latino community. As you can see, for example, in the book for Flight to Freedom, we collected testimonies from the Central American community uh, who were here during the early 80s and late 90s, and to visualize their struggle right into becoming rightful participants and citizens of this country. And then I'll pass it on to Caro so she can talk about recovery.
Thank you, Gabby.
Next
And
slide.
and I apologize because you're probably gonna hear a lot of noise here. And I'm in the only spot that I can get internet at this moment, so my apologies. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage. The Recovery Project, as we call it, it's under the umbrella of Arte Público Press. Is the historical arm of Arte Público Press, if you will. It was created in 1991 by a group of scholars doing the research, collecting by themselves these lost historical materials pertaining to the Latina communities, and that were not being preserved by the traditional archive. So they got together and they decided that they were just scratching the surface, and they needed to go deeper. And for that to happen, they needed to do it, create a space to do this kind of work, in other words. And what they did is create an alternative archive or a community archive that will locate, preserve, and make available all the written legacy of Latinas and Latinos from colonial times until 1961, and then it expanded until 1980. So, and this is a very interdisciplinary group of scholars that includes religious studies, feminist studies, includes historians, etc., etc. So it's very broad. We've been working for 30 years, recovering. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yes.
So you see in the next slide, we're recovering the materials. We provided grants through the recovery program that laid the foundation again for the recovery. If you will, like a subfield in Latino studies for recovery work. We have a conference every 2 years, and you is coming up in April, and where scholars specialized in this area of studies come and present their findings. So what we do is that we locate materials, or our scholars locate materials and bring it to us. So we have the equipment in our offices, and we're able to digitize the materials, as you see in the picture, create the metadata, and preserve it, and create databases and exhibits with the materials. Can you go to the next one, please? So one of our biggest collections, and keep in mind that we have everything from photographs to cookbooks to theater pieces. But in one of our biggest collections is the newspapers. Newspapers have been fundamental for our Latino community because there were, Latinos didn't have enough space or money to publish books at one point. So all that information, all the literature or the political views were published through the newspapers. So we have in-house a collection of around 1,500 newspapers, and this is growing. And I want to say that we have all the runs the complete runs for every newspaper. That is not true, because since they were not preserved, when we're very lucky, we're able to get the whole run from newspapers. If not, we just get a piece of the newspaper or even a clipping that we were able to preserve. We have newspapers starting with the first one published in Spanish in 1808 at Mississippi, published in New Orleans. And we have La Abeja, a trilingual newspapers. Latinos were publishing. These materials are prominently in Spanish, probably 85–90% of the newspapers are in Spanish. But Latinos were also publishing in other languages. They were publishing in French, for example. La Abeja that I was mentioning was a trilingual newspaper. We're publishing in English and Spanish, and we're publishing in Ladino in New York, for example. And you see, one of the newspapers at Lucero right there. So we have newspapers from both sides from the revolution. We have newspapers from the border. We have newspapers written by women. We have newspapers reading about feminism in the 1920s. So it's very broad and very rich. And like I said, this is growing. One of our next projects that we're developing right now, thanks to a grant from Clear Foundation and the Andrew Mellon Foundation, is to make available 200 newspapers from the border with the United States and Mexico that are unknown until now. And they will be available in an open face platform for everybody to use and research. Can we go to the next one, please? So one of the ways that we share the information, and we did this long time ago, was to partner with two big databases companies that help us distribute this information. It was very difficult for, and the scholars to travel to different archives to go and try to research. So we partnered with EBSCO and Newsbank, and with EBSCO we have two databases with thousands of books, articles from newspapers, etc., that you can research. And the Newsbank, we have 400 of our newspapers, completely searchable, that makes the work so much easier for students and for scholars to find these materials. What we provide, and this is really important, we provide context, and the work that David was mentioning, because sometimes you can find some of these materials in Google, but if you don't know what this is about, you have nothing at the end, or it can be used, it can be misinterpreted, right? So what we do is we train our students, and this is something that I wanted to mention. For us, it's very important to help build the scholars, Latino scholars and Latina scholars of the future for this area studies. So we are very aware of our role in training our students in archives, in creation of metadata, in history, and digital humanities now. We work with graduate students from the University of Houston. We receive volunteers and interns from other universities. We work with undergraduate students, and we've been going backwards in the way that we're going like younger and younger students, because we know that we need to work with the students early on. So we work with SED and Lulac 60 to bring students, undergrad students, and then high school students to work with us during the summer. And you wouldn't believe the projects and the commitment that the students put into these projects, and how they become aware of their own history through working with these archives. Then the latest project that we have with Gabby is to work in creating a digital timeline with students at elementary school, 4th and 5th grade, at a dual language school. So we're very excited about that and to see the results. And Gabby, I think this is your turn. Next one,
Yeah.
please.
So in order for us to complete a lot of these projects, we've established a set of best practices, especially when working with community, right? And so we work by centering our community and all of our projects. We establish relationships that are ethical, in the sense that the community knows that they're involved in a very active way as contributors, as researchers who are part of creating the intellectual capital that will be shared through these projects. We create networks also across the discipline, across the United States. We put our contributors in touch with other scholars and with other practitioners, so that we create a project that can hopefully be modeled and seen, in many different aspects and in many different places in the U.S. The protocols that we've developed really have accessibility and accountability and respect for labor, and the labor that everyone is participating in is documented by acknowledging, right, all participants as active contributors. In terms of accessibility, we try to make most of our projects bilingual, English and Spanish, and also keeping a register that is legible, right, to all communities. Um, we also cultivate these spaces of what we call collegial knowledge production. So we understand that everyone brings specific knowledge that should be validated, right? And the last thing is thinking of ethics of care. As uh, practitioners within Latino studies, we carry a lot of trauma from the archive, right? We get to see and experience the harshness, the experiences that our community endure, and a lot of times the things that they continue to live through. So we make sure that some of these things are acknowledged right through as we're working through the project. So if you look at the next slide, um, these are just some of the examples, and I'll drop the link so that people can see them. But we do a variety of platforms that we use. All of our platforms are free. Our software that is free and readily available, and with low bandwidth and easy to use. But I wanted to indicate that we have several Twitter bots, for example, and that's always exciting, right? To have. Um, I guess I can jump onto the next slide so that we can talk about how we have actually like used the digital tools to explore Lulac's history. Um, and we have a series of examples from the Alonso Perales collection. As many of you know, Alonso Perales is one of the key founders, or one of the major representatives of Lulac, right? He was one of the who we'd like to identify as one of like the principal founders of Lulac. In this image, you see him walking with his wife, uh, Marta Perales. Uh, and if you go on to the next slide, we give you a little bit more information about this archive, right? He published two important books, the En Defensa de Mi Raza, Volume 1 and 2, and Are We Good Neighbors? Do you want to say anything else about the acquisition of this collection, Carla?
Yes, we were very fortunate to receive this collection of the program. The daughter, Marta Carrizales, entrusted us with the collection. And because there were many universities that wanted to house this collection, that one of the things that we could offer was that since we're an independent archive, a nonprofit, we could do the work very fast. And this is a huge collection. Yeah, he was amazing on preserving every little piece of paper that he used. So it's incredible. I can only imagine what he would have done with a computer, you know. So we were very lucky because we have a complete documentation about his life and his political and civil involvement. And the collection came to us, it was more than 40 linear feet of materials, including photographs, uh, correspondence with all the major leaders of that time, and manuscripts from his books. And we work on a warehouse with students and volunteers to process the collection as fast as we could. And then we had a conference, a symposium, about the collection. There is a scholarship in his name at the law school at the University of Houston, and the book just came out. The book that we promised we will publish, it just came out, and it's beautiful if you have not seen it. And we develop a series of the digital projects because the collection is so rich that it really lends itself to showcase the kind of work that you can do digitally to enhance history and to make it more available, and to include students in the process of creating this kind of tool.
Yes.
Gabby?
If you go to the
Mhm.
next slide, we can briefly show you. I know we want to leave some time for questions, so this is one of the Twitter bots that we have. where it tweets I think every day,
Mhm.
a quote from the Alonso Perales collection. And I think the one
And
Carolina
I
was
can,
mentioning.
I just wanted to say one thing about that Twitter bot. It's so interesting to me how, so every day you get a quote from his writing, how many of them resonate to today, right? That if you're not following that and you're on Twitter, you should.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sarah. We also have an exhibit on Omeka, which is a digital exhibit, or like a museum type exhibit system that allows us to showcase some of the materials that we have from the collection. So we wanted to like bring to your attention this is the early version of the a draft of the Constitution, right? That is included in the archive, and we have a bunch of photographs, important documents that are extremely valuable to Lulac, and and to us as a Latino community who thankfully through the work of Lulac we're able to have many civil rights that we get to enjoy now, in these times, right? um, so if you jump to the next one, there's our colleague, Dr. Lorena Gothero, mapped out from the book "Are We Good Neighbors," which is a collection of a book, which is a book that collected um, different atrocities and reports that were happening to the Latino community across Texas. So Alonso Perales invited people to write to him and to document right times when people were suffering or had encountered a situation of injustice. And so Lorena decided to create a map on ArcGIS to map some of these spaces where some of these discrimination cases were happening. And some of them are just, very difficult to transcribe and to translate and to present because, we have severe situations where children were not given medical services. And so we can only imagine what that would feel like and how that could impact a family. Um, and speaking of ethics of care, in this time when Lorena did this, she could only do a few of these at a time because it was really traumatic to work and to think about other community that was enduring these events. The next one is another exhibit, another document or another image that will show you some of the things that we've done with this collection is that when we turned this over to the Library of Houston, to the special collections, the boxes included some envelopes that didn't have a letter attached to them. So the archivist, following the traditional formation, decided that these envelopes should not be kept in the archive because they didn't have a letter that was attached to them. And so they said, we're just going to return them to you, and you can decide, if you want to return them to the family or I don't know, or get rid of them, right? So we realized that these envelopes had a lot of data, right? So they have an address, a to and from. And so if you skip to the next slide, our colleagues, again, Lorena Gothero and our colleague from UNT, Teresa, what is the last name, Carol?
I'm sorry.
She helped us create this data set.
Mhm.
Were you gonna say the last name, Carol?
Next one.
I'm just blinking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
we created this visualization that allows us to see all the letters that were being sent to Alonso Perales. So Alonso Perales is in the middle, right in San Antonio, and then you see the letters going to all the different other areas, right, in different parts of the U.S. and South America, South and Central America. So through this, it's just incredible to see his reach during a time when we didn't have, the virtual, advances that we have now, to really document the importance of Alonso Perales to the community, as an activist who is documenting and making our communities giving them validation, right, and documenting all these injustices that are happening to them. And then the
And
last one,
I,
Caro, you want to take over?
I just wanted to say one thing. If you're tuning in from San Antonio, you might have noticed the address on that envelope is the offices that were on top of the Alameda Theater downtown, one of our storied Spanish language theaters.
And yeah, and we go to the point of presenting the timeline, right? We work with, like I mentioned before, with the community. We do pop-up exhibits, and we were thinking on other ways to showcase this information. And we started meeting with David on the wonderful set of information that he had, and we started thinking about how to collaborate and make this more visible. And can you go to the next
Oh, yes.
slide, please?
Yes.
So we decided that we wanted to show the history of Lulac in an interactive way, and we came across to this software called Timeline JS. And as Gabi mentioned, we use software that is free, so community members can use it, and we can teach them how to use it. So this is a very interactive digital timeline that allow us to include videos, photographs, documents. So it was really appropriate for all the information that David had been accumulating, throughout the years. So we, with Lulac 60 and Ray Valdez and National Lulac, they provided funds to pay for undergraduate students, 2 undergraduate students who we trained and work with us in creating and building and curating, along with David, this timeline. The timeline is, we decided as, many of our projects, that it needed to be in English and Spanish. So it's bilingual. You'll find the timeline in both languages. So it will be 2 different projects, and includes, landmarks in the history of Lulac. We have a set of a good number of lights in the timeline, and you can actually click on the videos and go see the videos, and you can click on the images and go to different pages. We grew so much that we're now with David, we're talking about creating different timelines, about different topics. And so for example, education or any other topic that will speak about the Lulac involvement in different areas. And David, do you want to add anything else about the timeline?
I think, as you mentioned, the timeline allows you to go and see, as an example, a speech of John Kennedy when he spoke with Lulac in 1963. It allows you. There's a wonderful example, like in 1957, dealing with the little school of the 400, where there was a video that was found from 1957 promoting the program, and in the video it shows the actual founder, who was a 16-year-old girl named Isabel Verver, and she's in the video, and you can see her at that time going from house to house collecting students for the program. And then you go fast forward 60 years, and then she's interviewed by Professor Jesus Medel. And what's amazing is the story that she tells is the same that it was 60 years before. But that's the part that I like best about that. And as you said, that you can go to news articles and photos and things like that.
Do you want me to go to another slide, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, next slide. Okay.
That's what we have. So this really showcases like all the work that we do, to bridge the gap between the university and the community, bringing the digital tools, right, to work with our community to make sure that these stories are not kept in archives, that they're not kept, hidden, like David said. these stories need to be made available to the youth to, be put into the hands of our community, so that we so that we know that we have rights. We know that we have, the right to be contributing members to this country. That people know that we have been doing that for a long time, right? Even before this nation was established as a nation.
Well, I want to thank you. This is an amazing example of collaboration between university and the community, and so many cool projects that have come out of this recovery, this larger recovery project, and really taking advantage of these newer digital tools to play around with it. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing your slide for a minute and see if I can actually share the website, just because it is so fun. This website just lets you scroll through time, and you get to see, looks like I'm in the Spanish one, which, what is it? It is in bilingual, so you can use either English or Spanish, but you can scroll through these different events in Lulac history, get an image, get information, and it's just so neat. And you can spend a lot of time exploring this. So oops, I wasn't showing that to you, was I? Here we go. Here it is. So here's the timeline. You can click on things there. So is that working? I'm so sorry. It looks like it's frozen. Okay, that's probably my internet. My apologies. I'll stop sharing that now. But the link is in the chat, so you can click on it and explore it yourself. But I can't even imagine how many hours it took to put that together, but it is beautiful. And so we do have a couple of questions. One was, I did see you put a response in the chat, but just for everybody, there was a question about collaboration with Mexico, where they obviously have a lot of resources. Can you speak a little bit about that? I think that's a question for Gabby, I think. I'm not sure.
It's a question for you, Carol. I responded for how do we collaborate with librarians in Mexico and Mexican scholars?
Yeah.
I think, can you hear me now? Yeah,
Yes.
I think it wasn't letting me talk. But yeah, so with the recovery project, we are very aware that these are transnational documents sometimes that travel. Exiles came to the United States and published, and then went back to their countries, and either they took the materials with them or they left them here. So we were always seeking, that collaboration and partnership with archives and libraries everywhere, not just in Mexico. Obviously, mostly with Mexico because we're, on the other side, but with Cuba, with Puerto Rico, with Latin America, and with Mexico for a long time. Knowing too that some of these documents are in precarious conditions, and the project that I mentioned before, it was that involves the 200 newspapers in the border. We are collaborating actually with two major archives in Saltillo and Tijuana to help digitize some of these materials and to make them available and to give them copies. And something that we didn't mention before, and I think is appropriate to say now, is that we work in a way that is now called post-custodial. We've been doing this for a long time though, before it was called that. And it means that we are not seeking to be the custodians of these collections. We seek to be the way that the community can use to preserve it and to make it available. So we respect the wishes of the community. We make copies that we digitize as following national standard, archival standards. And then we return it to the families or the archives and with a copy of the digital format. And this is not only at a institutional level, these partnerships. We look at these partnerships also with families, although we encourage families at the end to at one point donate the collections to an archive, not only for preservation purposes, but also for representation purposes. We need to make these collections. We need to fill the archives with our collections, so they learn about the importance, of our community that has always
Right.
been there. So
Right.
we also work with families to complete their legacy when they come to us with so little, because their families didn't think that their collections were important enough to be part of an archive. And it's not their fault. It's because, this is the system. So what we do is, we go in some cases to the newspapers and we complete, we give them copies of what we have so they can complete their family's histories as well.
Right.
So that was a long
Right.
answer for that question.
No, but it's so important, right? Several people have commented tonight, and we tend to get this comment a lot, that this is important information, and it's information that we were not taught in school. But if this information doesn't end up in sort of official repositories, it's going to take a long time for all that information to get disseminated out to the people who would most benefit from it and feel affirmed by that information. And so it's so important that we seek to bring some balance to the stories that our national archives tell. And so I just think what U of H and the Arte Público and Recovery Project have been doing is so impressive and so important. I think we are out of questions. So I do just want to share that earlier it was mentioned in the talk, the new Alonso Parales biography that has just been released by Arte Público Press by Dr. Cynthia Orozco. We're very pleased to be having Dr. Orozco come back. She's one of our favorite guests. She'll be coming back on March 1st to give a talk about her new biography of Alonso Parales, which writing that book involved a lot of spending time down there in Houston with you, right, with those papers. For all of our viewers in Texas, March 1st is our primary day. So vote early and then join us at 6 o'clock to watch the show. And it'll last an hour. So the polls close at 7, so you can still go to your watch parties after 7 o'clock, okay? And I think, David, let's end it with you.
Yeah, I have one final comment. I encourage everyone to go to this link with the timeline, and especially to look at the timeline for 1931, which is the origin of the Lulac Newsletter. And we were so privileged and honored to and grateful that Arte Público created a repository on a Google Drive that allowed us to populate all of these links to these newsletters. And I encourage you to go to 1931 on the timeline, to go to the newsletters. And there's a quote from Lulac today, and there was a news release that says that Lulac issues a renewal of call to action to its mission and vision. And then there's a quote from Domingo, and I'm just going to read the first sentence. It says, "This date is our history is especially important because the very same type of issues and threats our founders faced are still around, and in many ways the attacks are bad or worse." If you go to those newsletters, you're going to see history repeating itself.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of comments from people thanking you for sharing your knowledge with us tonight. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. It's always a pleasure to get to share this kind of information with the public. I want to extend our gratitude to our guests for joining us tonight. I want to thank our funders, the City of San Antonio, AARP, Wells Fargo, and members of MACRI's Patronato, as well as individual donors like you, possibly. If you liked tonight's presentation, I encourage you to learn more about MACRI and how you can support our vision for a national center dedicated to preserving and disseminating Mexican-American civil rights history by visiting our website at somosmacri.org. I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Good night.